10 Nights of Dreams, Natsume Soseki, the 8th night. When I crossed the threshold of the barbershop, 3 or 4 men in white clothes, who had been gathered together, all said, "Welcome," at once. Standing in the middle and looking around, I saw it was a square room. Windows were open on 2 sides, and mirrors hung on the remaining 2. I counted the mirrors, and there were 6. I walked up to one of them and sat down. As I did, the seat made a soft, squishy sound. It was an exceptionally comfortable chair to sit in. My face was clearly reflected in the mirror. Behind my face, I could see the window. Then, I saw the lattice of the counter at an angle. There was no one inside the lattice. I could clearly see from the waist up the people passing by on the street outside the window. Shotaro passed by, accompanied by a woman. At some point, Shotaro had bought a Panama hat and was wearing it. As for the woman, I had no idea when he had found her. I really couldn't tell. Both of them looked quite proud of themselves. Before I could get a good look at her face, they had passed by. A tofu vendor passed by, blowing his horn. Because he had the horn pressed to his mouth, his cheeks were puffed out, as if he had been stung by a bee. He passed by, with his cheeks puffed out, just like that, so it left me feeling incredibly anxious. I felt as though he would remain stung by a bee for the rest of his life. A geisha appeared. She hadn't put on her makeup yet. The base of her shimada hair bun was loose, making her head look somewhat untidy. Her face, too, looked half asleep. Her complexion was pitiably poor. She bowed and said, "Well, thank you for whatever." But the person she was speaking to simply would not appear in the mirror. Then a large man in white clothes came up behind me, holding scissors and a comb, and began to observe my head. I twisted my thin mustache and asked, "Well, will I amount to anything?" The man in white said nothing, but lightly tapped my head with the amber-colored comb in his hand. "Well, my head too. But what do you think? Will I amount to anything?" I asked the man in white. The man in white still answered nothing, and began to make a snip-snip sound with his scissors. I had intended to keep my eyes fixed on the mirror to catch every single reflection, but every time the scissors snipped, black hair came flying at me. I grew frightened and eventually closed my eyes. Then the man in white said this, "Sir, did you see the goldfish vendor out front?" I said I hadn't. The man in white said no more, and just kept snipping his scissors incessantly. Then suddenly there was a loud voice shouting, "Watch out!" Startled, I opened my eyes and saw the wheel of a bicycle beneath the sleeve of the man in white. I saw the shafts of a rickshaw. Just as I saw them, the man in white grabbed my head with both hands and firmly turned it to the side. The bicycle and the rickshaw vanished completely from sight. The sound of the scissors went snip-snip. Before long, the man in white moved to my side and began cutting around my ear. The hair was no longer flying forward, so I felt relieved and opened my eyes. "Millet, mochi, mochi, mochi," a voice called out right nearby. They were intentionally striking a small mallet against a mortar, keeping a rhythm as they pounded the mochi. I hadn't seen a millet mochi vendor since I was a child, so I wanted to get a little look at him. However, the millet mochi vendor simply would not appear in the mirror. Only the sound of mochi being pounded could be heard. Using all my visual strength, I peered intently into the corner of the mirror. Then, inside the lattice of the counter, a woman was sitting there before I knew it. She was a large woman with a darkish complexion and thick eyebrows. Her hair was tied in a ginkgo leaf style and she wore a plain kimono with a black satin collar. With one knee raised, she was counting bills. The bills seemed to be 10-yen notes. The woman cast down her long eyelashes, pressed her thin lips together, and was desperately counting the bills, and her way of counting was incredibly fast. Yet, no matter how far she went, the number of bills showed no sign of running out. There were at most 100 or so bills resting on her lap, but no matter how long she counted them, that 100 remained 100. I stared in a daze at this woman's face and the 10-yen bills. Then, right by my ear, the man in white said in a loud voice, "Let's wash." It was just the right moment, so the instant I stood up from the chair, I turned and looked toward the counter's lattice. However, neither the woman, nor the bills, nor anything else could be seen inside the lattice. I paid the fee and went outside. On the left side of the entrance, about 5 oval-shaped tubs were lined up, and inside them were many red goldfish, mottled goldfish, thin goldfish, and fat goldfish. The goldfish vendor rested his chin in his hands, perfectly still, staring fixedly at the goldfish lined up in front of him. He paid almost no mind to the noisy activity of the street. I stood for a while, gazing at this goldfish vendor. But for as long as I gazed at him, the goldfish vendor didn't move a single inch.